Hi, I'd love to discuss something I'm really passionate about, and that's storytelling in UX. So, user experience design is, I'd say at this point, about five different specializations, all of which revolve around creating software, all of which are about solving problems, all of which have to do with empathizing with humans and computers and trying to get the best match possible between the two so that you're be able to please both camps. Why do we engage people with computers? Mainly because computers are fairly able to bend to our wills and they will almost do whatever we ask them to do, whereas people are almost the opposite. They actually want autonomy and understanding and lack of confusion and frustration. We're trying to make sure that the two computers, while very malleable, are very prone to being frustrating. Having just spent almost 2 days to fix a particular issue on my certificate for my site. So anyway, understanding firewalls and HTTPS and all those things that are part and parcel of what this creation of computer generated information is all about also comes with a cost of not necessarily being easy to understand, fairly obtuse, but humans aren't. We want simplicity and clarity. So, the thing I'd see in most people's portfolios, and my advice, and the reason I'm shooting this, is to talk a little bit about the process of how do you present your work. And when I see work, one thing I see, especially out of much of the training that people are getting from Google and others, is they've got a pretty good plan. They know the sort of high points to check boxes on, and they tend to be something like personas. Maybe those personas create some impetus into some features, and those features are understood and prioritized in some way, which lead to explorations of wireframes, maybe ways that people can accomplish these tasks. And that usually leads to some sort of feedback or testing loop where you validate or invalidate some of your ideas that went through, etc. And rinse and repeat. That's a pretty good model for how it works. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think are the pitfalls, one of which, and we'll just start with the specialization where people are more into UX storytelling. And the reason why storytelling is so critical is that that's what we're used to as people. We've been listening to stories our whole lives, stories about people and doing things, and all of that is really ingrained pretty heavily into our nature. So what I see as a negative is that oftentimes we get things like these personas that come in paper and decks, and they're somewhat dense. There's usually some graphics involved. There's usually a picture. Normally that picture feels to me a little bit forced or faked, which is another topic, but they have some characteristics, and then usually these are presented and people tend to nod, and then what happens is usually nothing. And that's my frustration with them. They're not usually the tool that they're meant to be used for. And I think I've got a few tips of how you can show in your portfolio that you really have used these and why they're important. And I still think they're critical because it engages more people across the board in the storytelling aspect of what you're trying to do. So let's say you have your persona Marty McFly. Marty McFly might have a picture. He might have some characteristics. He might consider himself to be a little bit too adept at some things. He doesn't have a lot of experience in another. But it just so happens that you want to tell the story of how Marty McFly gets this hoverboard. Well, you establish in your persona that Marty McFly is really good at skateboarding, really loves skateboarding, has no real problem, is somewhat experienced and adept. So when the hoverboard is introduced, we all accept the fact that, oh, well, this new thing, Marty McFly just takes to it immediately. Now, if you had not established that, you would say, wait, this hoverboard thing is really going to confuse and maybe accidents will occur or whatever. You all, without having developed any software at all, can have a discussion about how someone may or may not find a particular feature or some sort of advancement that you want to make, something that they would be able to handle. So it's a fairly powerful thing, these stories. And with, in my experience, again, I've seen a lot of the user will Or I've seen a lot of all users will. Because another thing I see with personas often is too many of them. For some reason, again, it's not War and Peace in a sense. Like War and Peace could have 20 major characters. It's a fairly long book. It's also something that is most people consider dense because of how many characters are involved. And for each character, you have to understand their actions, their motivations, the things that are presented to them, and you have to then judge again your feelings about this character and what positives and negatives. And my point being is this is something people just are pretty good at. They don't have much trouble with this concept, but the personas that I've seen and the way they're used usually doesn't lend people to just pick them up and use them right away. So I do hope you use personas, because user-centered design has to do with understanding people. And most of the time, almost always, they are not you. They're not on your team. The people you're developing the software for aren't in the room. So you need some proxy for them. And then you need to understand pretty much at a quick, understandable level where they come from. So perhaps one of the easier sets of personas is advanced user, someone who's familiar with your product, and maybe someone who's brand new to your product. Those are two people who are going to approach things very differently. And between those two, you should be able to have lots of understandings about prioritization of features. Because you could say, well, we really want to bring in new people. Oh, but old people pay the bill. See, you're already having a debate right there. And those debates are positive. They help lead to prioritization. They help lead to probably better alignment across the team, because when you've got a cross-functional team, that prioritization of features and what we're going to tackle first really plays a large role in both morale, how just in general, how people are going to react to and feel engaged in the project itself. If they don't know what they're building things for or why, stories are supposed to help them. And they also are supposed to give a voice to those who feel like, well, hey, I don't feel as though this is really meeting this particular need for this particular person, right? I think that this is still hard to use. It's not the hoverboard, it's something else. So those debates centered around the user experience goal of creating a persona are something pretty advanced. And that's why I don't like when it skips forward. It really doesn't talk about the goal, which is for UX to help technical people as well as business people prioritize the issues with human needs. Because right now you've got a Venn diagram. You've got your computer, and hopefully that's something that you feel pretty confident that you're able to create something that the computer will do reliably, etc. But people don't operate in the same way. People are idiosyncratic. They've got needs, they've got misconceptions. Mental models is a really good example. We can go into that in maybe another video where, how do I perceive the world? How does this persona perceive the world? And how are we presenting something that either fits in hoverboard still, that fits into the mental model, right? It's just like a skateboard. It just doesn't have wheels. So great, but oh no, I'm inventing this new thing. Which I think Marty McFly does invent the skateboard in the first one, where that doesn't make any sense. No, I understood what this thing does, but I don't understand what this new thing you created does. I see the effects. I see the positives. I just don't have a way to fit it into my mind yet. So that's what these personas need to communicate quickly and clearly. That's why I often have tried things like cards, something that really represent it. So when you're having discussions, you're supposed to really use the cards in order to figure out what the biases are for the character, not the biases from the business or from people who have used similar software or other anecdotal things that become a little bit more cloudy when you're trying to build a hypothesis. And that's a really good place to end. So you want a persona, an outcome, a method, and we can talk later about how those methods become more physical. Maybe they become wireframes or something you can look at, but you still want to track it back to, hey, this is the method by which someone's going to achieve this outcome, and that someone is the persona name. And if you've got similar features but different personas, you might then have a great discussion about how do you get this person to have the same outcome. when it isn't always clear that they might not have the ability to do such a thing. So then another a really good discussion, and maybe priorities come out of that. And the name of the game is priorities. Oftentimes in software, there's not enough time, I think, spent in understanding that prioritization happens constantly. It's just like life. Everything is not a priority all the time, and there isn't equal priorities. So if you write stories down like we love to do on these sort of things here, you not only can put them in order, but what I like, is the user's persona name, achieve outcome here, and then the method here, right? So there's something like that. This can be prioritized hierarchically, but I love 2x2s, which is basically two priorities set off against each other, because it also is a great way to have a discussion about how do we manage the difficulties of, let's say, value to business, value to customer. Customers value different things other than giving money away to companies. So you have to at least judge on that level, and that's where particular features might come across as being more important to the team and more prioritized, because you've really had these discussions and understanding across a group that can speak the same language. And those rarely happen without these tools, and I really do credit the UX and design thinking community for kind of coming up with these ways, because it is not about the practitioner. It's about the practitioner helping the team become more adept at talking about how to build useful and hopefully fun to build and fun to engage these customers in, because this becomes also something you get feedback on. It's testable. It has an outcome later that you can learn from, because often you're just kind of making things up, which is fantastic. But you do want to learn, because making things up is a good starting point, but you want to build knowledge around it. So user stories, personas, hopefully you can show that in your portfolio, and that really does solve, I think, the beginning issues in a UX professional's goals and what they're good at.